Chicago, the winter of 1959. A physicist named Leonard Reiffel sits at a desk inside a research foundation tied to the Illinois Institute of Technology, reviewing a folder stamped classified. The project has a dull, forgettable name: A Study of Lunar Research Flights, the kind of title you'd skim right past. Government paperwork, something about the moon. But the men who commissioned it don't want research. They want a bomb, and they want the whole planet to watch it go off. Reiffel is not designing a telescope or a probe or a soft landing. He is calculating exactly what would happen if the United States flew a nuclear warhead 250,000 miles across space and detonated it on the surface of the moon. And for the next 40 years, almost no one on Earth would know it was ever considered. To understand why grown, serious scientists sat in a room and planned to nuke the moon, you have to understand the fear. October 1957. The Soviet Union launches Sputnik, a metal ball the size of a beach ball circling the Earth, beeping. It sounds almost quaint now. It was terrifying then, because that same rocket that lifted a beeping ball into orbit could just as easily lift a nuclear warhead over an American city. Overnight, the Soviets looked like they were winning, not just the space race, the future itself. America needed an answer, a big one, something loud. And inside the US Air Force, the answer that started to take shape was almost unthinkable. If the Russians could put a beeping ball in orbit, America would put a fireball on the moon. That was the real purpose behind that boring little title. The Armor Research Foundation, working for the Air Force, quietly pulled together a team of physicists and mathematicians. Leonard Reiffel led it. Their job was to study, in cold, technical detail, the feasibility of a nuclear explosion on the lunar surface. What size warhead, what kind of rocket, what it would do to the moon, and most importantly, what it would look like from down here. Because this was never really about the moon at all. Here's what the planners understood. A nuclear blast in the vacuum of space wouldn't look like the mushroom clouds people knew from test footage. There's no air up there to hold the shape, no atmosphere to carry the shockwave, so the visual effect would depend entirely on where you hit. And they had a very specific target in mind. Not the bright, sunlit face of the moon, and not the dark side either. They wanted the line in between, the exact border where lunar day meets lunar night. Astronomers call it the terminator. If you set off a nuclear flash against the black, shadowed part of the moon, the sudden burst of light would stand out like a match struck in a pitch-black room. A cloud of glowing dust, kicked up off the surface and lit by the raw sun, would flare and spread where every eye on the night side of Earth could see it. No telescope needed, just look up. That was the plan, a message the size of the sky. On some ordinary evening, people across America and across the Soviet Union would glance up at the familiar moon and see it wounded. And they would understand, without a single word being spoken, exactly who had the power to reach out and touch another world. It was psychological warfare aimed at the human race, written across the one thing every culture on Earth has always looked up to. And to make that flash behave the way they wanted, they needed to know precisely how a cloud of vaporized rock and dust would expand in a place with no air to slow it down. That is a very particular physics problem. Strange, almost beautiful. And for it, the team brought in a young graduate student. Brilliant, ambitious, 25 years old. His name was Carl Sagan. Yes, that Carl Sagan. The man who, decades later, would become the gentle voice of the cosmos. The man who taught a generation to feel wonder at the stars, who called Earth a pale blue dot and pleaded with us to cherish it. Before all of that, before Cosmos, before he was the most beloved scientist in America, Carl Sagan was a young man on the payroll of a project designed to detonate an atomic bomb on the moon. His assignment was to model the cloud, to calculate whether the explosion would produce that visible flash the Air Force wanted, or fizzle into nothing. And here is where the secret nearly slipped long before the world was ready for it. In 1959, Sagan applied for a prestigious academic fellowship, and on that application, trying to show the important work he'd been part of, he listed the titles of his contributions, including the classified ones. He named the project. He described work that was supposed to stay buried inside a locked government file. It was a leak, a young man's ambition brushing up against a state secret. For decades, no one connected the dots because no one on the outside knew the project existed to connect them to. The breadcrumbs sat there, hidden in plain sight, waiting 40 years for someone to notice what it meant. Because the project itself was quietly killed. By the end of 1959, the men in charge got cold feet, and their reasons are, in their own way, the most chilling part of the whole story. It wasn't a moral awakening. The fear was about how it would look. What if, instead of feeling proud, ordinary Americans looked up at that scarred moon and felt sick? A flex only works if the audience is impressed, not horrified. And there was a second worry: contamination. What if you wanted to actually study the moon someday, send people there, and you'd already sprayed radioactive debris across its surface? What if you poisoned the very thing you were racing to reach? So the plan was shelved, the folder was closed, the team dispersed, and a study of lunar research flights vanished into the archives. Its bland little title now doing exactly the job it was designed for: hiding what was inside. For 40 years it stayed hidden, through the actual moon landings, through the whole hopeful story America told about itself. The story of peaceful explorers reaching for the stars, of one giant leap for mankind. Underneath that story sat the memory of the year the Air Force wanted to blow a piece of that same moon apart to scare the Russians. It only surfaced in the year 2000. Leonard Reiffel, by then an old man, decided to speak. He confirmed it all: the warhead, the Terminator, the flash meant for the whole world. And the young Carl Sagan, who by then was dead and could no longer explain the classified titles he'd let slip on a fellowship form more than 4 decades earlier. Reiffel told the world the idea of desecrating the moon for a stunt had never sat right with him. But he also said something else, something that lingers. He said the full details of Project A119 were never completely declassified, that what he described was what he was willing and able to say. The rest of it, the exact plans, the precise calculations, whatever else those men committed to paper in that Chicago office in 1959, remains where it has always been, sealed, somewhere in a government file, under a name so boring you'd never look twice. That's as far as the paper trail goes. The rest got classified, redacted, or quietly lost. Make of that what you will. Thanks for sitting with me in the dark a while. There's always another file they would rather stayed buried, so keep asking the questions, and I'll see you on the next one.